Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, covering for Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. Private equity has been rapidly growing its share of the housing market, taking advantage of a housing crisis and in some cases exacerbating it. As corporate landlords gain influence, tenants are uniting and innovatively targeting their vulnerabilities. This involves voicing grievances to regulators and public pension funds that invest in private equity. Joining us now is the Housing Research Coordinator at Private Equity Stakeholder Project, Madeline Bankson. Madeline, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here.
Now, the Private Equity Stakeholder Project aims to bring transparency and accountability to the private equity industry. Can you just elaborate on the project's overall goals?
Yeah, exactly. We're a watchdog nonprofit, so we're working partially as an advocacy organization and partially as what you would typically think of as a think tank, but mostly just trying to mitigate the impact of the private equity industry on people and the planet. So we're working in 5 major issue areas. That's healthcare, climate, detention surveillance, and labor, as well as housing, where I work.
And how does it empower communities and working families impacted by private equity investments?
Yeah, so we tried to take as much guidance as possible from folks who are most impacted by the private equity industry, whether that be as workers or as tenants, and we try to see what issues they're dealing with and help them to strategize to solve those issues. So whether that be trying to work with their investors in order to motivate change or to draw attention to the issues these people are facing, or even doing policy work, we kind of do it all.
Now, the private equity industry has become a significant player in various sectors, including housing. Could you provide an overview of how private equity has expanded its influence in the housing market and why this trend is concerning for stakeholders?
Yes, absolutely. So private equity is increasingly touching many parts of people's lives, and housing is no exception. So if you can name a type of housing, private equity probably has investments there. So they're buying up mobile home parks, they're getting involved in multifamily housing or apartment buildings, and increasingly they're also purchasing up single family rentals all around the country. This has all sorts of impacts for tenants, as it's one of the most important parts of their lives, as well as would-be home buyers. But what we're really kind of seeing is that tenants often have, to say that it's negative customer service experiences is putting it a little bit lightly. Folks are being displaced by increasing rent. They're dealing with all kinds of home maintenance issues and other predatory practices. In general, it's also making it much more expensive to buy a home in certain markets where private equity is extremely active, and rents are increasing there as well.
Okay, so I want to clarify, this is affecting pretty much everybody, whether you're a homeowner or somebody looking to buy a home as well as renters?
I would say that's correct. Renters are going to be the most impacted, especially low-income renters. But folks who are seeking to buy homes or who are generally just looking at the housing market are impacted as well.
Now, the housing market has witnessed significant private equity investment with large corporate landlords acquiring both, as you mentioned, multifamily and single family homes. How has this trend impacted housing affordability and tenant rights? And does your project work to hold these landlords accountable?
Yes, that is the main goal of our work, is to make sure that people are able to understand what's happening with private equity in the housing space, as well as to hold them accountable. It's a little hard to draw a direct parallel to price increases, but what we have seen is in markets where investors are active, there are skyrocketing both rent rates and housing costs. Furthermore, beyond just kind of the price concerns, which obviously are a huge deal for many people, we are seeing that tenant conditions are worsening. So sometimes tenants are forced onto month-to-month leases, so they have less stability. Other times people are dealing with prolonged maintenance issues, and many people are also being evicted, which can really harm someone's life when they have that eviction on their record for 7 years. It's almost impossible to get a new home. So overall, just really kind of undermining people's day-to-day ability to live and thrive.
Yeah, I want to talk about basically what can individuals, communities, and organizations do to get involved and advocate for change in this industry. But first, how do you educate so many of these communities where I'm assuming that a lot of people don't really know what's going on or what's even happening? They just probably see this change happening around them.
Well, I will say that you have to give people credit. I think they're very aware that their material conditions are shifting for the worse, but they don't always understand the mechanisms for why. So what we do is assume that people are smart and just help them locate some of these pinch points for where they can leverage their power over private equity. So when we see tenants organize, which is the most effective method of intervention, a strong tenant organization, we can kind of work with them to do all kinds of things. So that's perhaps helping them garner media attention. Other times it is supporting the tenants in trying to negotiate with the private equity firms themselves, or even to speak with their investors to try and leverage that investor influence.
Now, can you provide? Oh, I'm sorry. You can continue.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to know, were there any specific examples of negative impacts of private equity's ownership of rental housing?
Yes, I want to draw attention to one of our particular tenant partners, the organization African Communities Together, or ACT. ACT is organizing in Alexandria, Virginia, against the company CIM Group, which is a private equity firm based in Los Angeles. They have a complex where traditionally African immigrants have lived and thrived for many years, but upon CIM purchasing the complex, it's become more expensive to live there. Evictions have become more frequent, and it's become much more difficult for the tenants there to get remedies for maintenance issues and other customer service issues. They've been through a lot of different kinds of things. A persistently broken elevator wasn't one thing, but I think overall they're really strongly organized, and they are working with federal regulators in order to spur motivation. That's one instance where we can see, or sorry, to spur change rather than motivation. And that's one instance where we're working to see just serious improvement because tenants banded together.
Now, in recent years, private equity firms have invested heavily in affordable housing, often targeting units where rent restrictions are set to expire. How does this investment pattern impact communities relying on these units for affordable housing, and what are the potential consequences for vulnerable populations?
So in the United States, we have shifted a lot of what would traditionally be public housing into the affordable housing model, particularly through low-income housing tax credit, as well as a few other programs. What we're seeing is that firms, especially including Blackstone Group is one that we have looked at, have bought up these affordable housing portfolios. And that's just gravely concerning, mostly because we know that these companies are very driven in general by profit. I'll stop there.
Now, the pandemic prompted a surge in investment by mega landlords in properties with temporarily reduced values. How has this affected the housing market, and what potential consequences do you see for affordable housing in the coming years?
Yes, we're seeing all over the country. There is really just increased investment in single family housing in particular that has made it essentially impossible in some places for regular people to afford a home. So in places like Atlanta, we see that private equity firms in the area own 65,000 homes. That's effectively making it so that regular people just simply can't compete either with the rising costs, or they can't no longer get a home, maybe even in the neighborhood where they grew up. This has really tremendous implications for racial justice in particular. Private equity firms, more so even than other corporate landlords, tend to target their investment for single family homes in predominantly Black neighborhoods and predominantly lower income neighborhoods. So a lot of those starter homes are getting taken up. Overall, things have calmed down a bit. there was a lot of investor activity in 2021, but the overall trend is still really concerning, and lawmakers should be paying attention, as should tenants.
And I wanted to expand on that because I noticed previously you mentioned the ACT organization with that was with the building with a lot of African immigrants, and you also mentioned just now this also impacts a lot of Black communities. Can you just expand on how this impacts communities of color a little bit different from other communities?
Yes, absolutely. So, like I just said, I think the investment that targets Black neighborhoods in particular is really a problem. But also, Black renters in particular are really disproportionately more likely to be in need of affordable housing because we live in a country where systemic racism impacts economic issues as well. So in addition to kind of buying up that supply, it means that people are much more likely to be dealing with the ramifications of displacement, evictions, and poor living conditions. And these things have a snowball effect that can last for a very long time. And as we know, there's a strong link as well between homelessness and mass incarceration that is worth discussing.
Thank you so much for clarifying that and expanding on that, because I definitely do think it was like something important to touch on. Now, as private equity firms expand their influence in housing and other sectors, how do you envision the industry evolving in terms of its responsibility to the economy, society, and the environment?
Yes. So what we hope is that these firms are able to commit to having investment practices that are not quite as destructive. So what we're really calling on in the housing sphere is to ensure that tenants have some basic protections, like that they're able to negotiate together collectively and be recognized, or that they are not raising rents to a really tremendous degree. These are not incredibly complicated or huge asks, but they are somewhat contradictory to the business model of getting as much profit as possible. However, we do believe that it is possible for the private equity industry to behave in a way that is less harmful to tenants, workers, and other people.
With the rise of corporate landlords, what steps do you believe need to be taken to ensure that affordable housing remains accessible to those who need it most and that tenant rights are protected?
We need strong action at every level of government to counter this issue. And there are many different areas that can sort of be explored, which is good. The primary thing that I personally would advocate for is going to be some form of price control in order to stop this rent gouging that has become so out of control in recent months. We have seen that it is effective, and it also stops constant speculation. It's a really powerful anti-speculative device. In addition, we also want to get more transparency and oversight. So that's just collecting information about what these companies own and what LLCs they're operating through so that we can track and coordinate at a state or a federal level. Transparency obviously is not enough. So we're also going to want to have the types of laws that limit the amount of homes these folks are able to own so that other people have more of a shot, whether that's through making the buying process more friendly to regular individuals or just overall placing caps on how much wealth these companies can amass. In addition, there's a lot of local action that we can take, and I have actually written the report about that.
Oh, are you able to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the best way that we're going to counter private equity is really just to have robust tenant protections in addition to the sort of price control and like antitrust type work I was just discussing. Having robust tenant protections really make sure that sort of the worst impacts of these extractive practices are not harming people. So one thing that works really well that we've seen is requiring landlords to have licenses and collecting their information in a database. In addition to that, pairing that with some kind of proactive rental inspection to ensure that tenants have a basic quality of housing is gravely important for this moment in time.
And what can people do to basically kind of learn more about this and know what resources are available to help them?
Yes, the private equity industry is extremely complex and difficult to understand, but the work of our organization is to make that intelligible to people. So you can check out our website, that's pestakeholder.org, where we have kind of plain language blogs breaking down how private equity operates in each of our issue areas. In addition, we also have webinars and popular education materials that are intended to educate community groups if you are so interested.
All right, well, Madeline,
And
thank you.
furthermore, oh, sorry, I would just say
Yeah.
I would encourage people to work with their local tenants organizations, many of whom are very aware of this issue and are already kind of working to fight it.
All right, well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this important discussion.
Thank you.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back right after this.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
Bro, you gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's a white people thing.
Escúchame, en esta casa los hombres no lloran.
You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
Thanks for hearing me out, bro. Appreciate it.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad. Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Even though we didn't grow up together, he's my favorite brother.
Hey, sis.
I'm the baby of the family, and he's the gentle giant.
What you know about Port Georgia?
Man, please, that's a classic.
You know when they say people are a rare breed? Yeah, he's that.
I'm sorry, I'll be back in a few hours. Don't worry, Shug, you know I'm for you. I know. Go get the football.
That was my favorite memory. He was always for ya. This is a true story of me, Bridget Floyd, and this guy, George Perry Floyd Jr., my big brother.
Welcome back. Tenants and Neighbors is a grassroots membership organization collaborating closely with tenants to empower them in preserving and safeguarding affordable housing throughout New York State. Since its inception, the organization has been highly successful in preserving thousands of units of affordable housing and bolstering tenant rights at the city, state, and federal levels. Joining us is the Executive Director of Tenants Neighbors, Genesis Aquino. Genesis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting.
Now, can you talk about the organization Tenants and Neighbors and its two affiliations?
So Tenants and Neighbors is, we are a 501c4 nonprofit organization founded in 1974 for the sole purpose of doing advocacy at the state level to strengthen tenants' rights in Albany. As you may know, New York City has no power over its housing regulations. So it all depends on Albany. So the organization was formed because of that. And then the C3 is the organization in charge of organizing and doing grassroots work to create independent tenant associations in at-risk affordable housing, and also to provide leadership development and technical assistance to tenants who want to organize their buildings. And we are mostly based, in New York City.
Now, I understand that the organization was obviously created many years ago, but can you just talk about, maybe what inspired the creation of it? What was that moment that, people in New York knew that this was something that needed to be around in the city?
Like I said, so we, especially the C3 part of the organization, which is to organize, was founded because there was a big need to protect average affordable housing. So we were formed initially to organize in buildings that are federally subsidized, basically project-based Section A. A lot of these buildings were still are being basically converted into market rate, right? Being bought by predatory equity investors. And after they were bought, oftentimes tenants were left without the subsidy, right? For example, if a tenant who live in a project-based Section 8 building is paying $1,000 for the, let's say, two-bedroom apartment, once the building is bought by predatory equity investors, then they'll lose the subsidy, right? So the rent will be $3,000. So it's very likely that the people who live in that neighborhood will be displaced, and the neighborhood will be getting gentrified because of the lack of protection to that type of affordable housing. As the year passed, we started organizing in other type of housing like rent stabilized and rent control apartments, and also federally and state subsidized Michelama co-ops, which were also being lost due to lack of investment from the government.
Now, you mentioned gentrification, and I think it's so important. Now, I know that many of us probably have heard the term before, but for those who aren't as aware, can you just talk about gentrification and how it's actually affecting so many communities in New York?
Yeah, again, gentrification is really caused by the imbalance between the tenants and the real estate industry that have a lot of power and a lot of money to leverage legislation, unlike most tenants, right, who are mostly poor and working class, low and moderate income people, right, who are maybe unlikely to be connected to resources and have power when it comes to legislation. So um, I lost my train of thought. I went too far, but yeah, gentrification again, the imbalance between the real estate industry and uh, low and moderate income tenants. And it's usually caused because we don't happen to own uh, the housing in which we live, and we have very little control over it. And also, as a collective or as individuals, we don't have power to, for example, to donate $1 million to the governor and have influence over how Albany or the state or the city administration regulates housing. So that causes displacement in our communities. So what we do is organize at the building level, but also form coalition between the tenants who have same landlords and tenants who um, want to organize at the city level and build coalitions so that we can build power to change that and preserve affordability in our communities. Most of the time, people who are being displaced are people of color, Black and brown people in particular, and people who happen to be immigrant or have different intersections that are created by this economic system or in systems of oppression uh, that have been built throughout the history of this country. So it is a sad situation, and it's being accelerated each day even more because of the lack of affordable housing being constructed and the lack of protection to preserve the current affordable housing that we have.
Now, can you talk about some of the work you do to educate, some of the communities that you just mentioned, especially those who may speak different languages? I'm sure that can also possibly, be another barrier or another challenge for people who are facing these issues. So can you just talk about some of the work you do to assist them or at least educate them in this field?
Yeah, most of the tenants that come to Tenants and Neighbors, they come because they are living in deplorable conditions. They're facing harassment, they're facing lack of repairs. Some of them, again, they're about, their building is about to lose their subsidy. So what we do is that we train them and provide leadership development so that they can run their own independent tenant association. So in some cases, that means helping tenants form bylaws, helping tenants run and facilitate their own meetings Sometimes it means helping tenants incorporate their tenant association so that they can become themselves a non-profit organization and receive funding and collect funding so that they can run their meetings. And oftentimes that also means training tenants so that they can speak to media and that they can learn how to lobby and advocate for legislation and uh, policy reforms at the city and state and federal level so that they can have power and decide over their lives and determine the future for their communities. So that's the type of leadership development that we do. So providing that, yeah.
Now, I also wanted to expand. I know that oftentimes when we talk about tenants, we're usually talking about rent. And, we're talking about it in like a monetary way. But, I recently had the privilege of going out and learning about so many people's experience where the buildings just weren't even up to standard. So they were paying rent. But let's say, they didn't have clean water, or the building was infested with rats and rodents and stuff like that. Does your organization also help with letting them understand that they have rights to speak out against that?
Exactly. That's the main part of organizing. So we help tenants understand what are their rights. We also connect tenants to legal representations so that they can sue their landlord in housing court and fight for repairs and against harassment, but also provide technical assistance so that they can build power, right? And make collective decision for their communities. But again, most of the people that call tenants and neighbors are people who are facing issues at, at the individual level, people who are experiencing eviction, people who are living in bad conditions, or people simply who don't know when or how to sign their lease, how much the rent should increase. So we provide a legal resource for them so that they can be empowered also at the individual level and able to remain in their homes.
Now, I think that's so important, the legal aspect of it. I think a lot of people often think, obviously protesting and making your voice heard is very important, but there is a legal side that can often be intimidating for some people. I guess from your work experience, can you talk about what that process may look like and possibly give advice to people who are currently going through that right now?
Sorry, would you?
Hello? Okay, are you able to hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay, great. So I'll just repeat the question. So I basically asked, the legal aspect is a very important part of this. And I think sometimes people often get very intimidated by this. Do you have any advice for people who are currently going through that? And, what are the steps that they should take in regard to, I guess, beginning that legal process?
I mean, the first thing is seeking assistance, right? Most tenants don't know in what type of apartment or housing they live. So learning in which type of housing you live is the first step, right? If you live in a very stabilized apartment, for example, like almost 2 million New Yorkers, we have a lot of tenant rights, especially rights that were strengthened in 2019. If you live in a market rate apartment, it's completely different, right? So learning that first step is crucial to moving forward. And then from there, we can know what rights you have on that, right? And then seeking, I would say, assistance to get legal representation. In New York City, we have the right to counsel for people who are low income. And you may qualify for legal representation if you are facing eviction. And I would say one of the most important things, at least for our organizing model in tenants and neighbors, is building coalition with your neighbors. It's very likely that if you are facing, let's say, a repair issue, very likely your neighbors also experiencing the same thing. So talking to your neighbors is important because there is power in numbers. And you are likely to win a case when you have evidence that other people in the building are facing the same issue.
Now, I know that you mentioned something happened in 2019. I'm not sure if this is the exact same thing that I'm thinking of, but I understand that on June 14th, 2019, the Upstate Downstate Housing Alliance sparked changes to New York State rent regulation system in the past 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that happening?
Yeah, so Tenants and Neighbors is a leading member of the Downstate Upstate Alliance. We formed that alliance so that we can build strength uh, in the state, right? And in 2019, we basically had the strongest victory for tenants in over 20 years for the state of New York. So we strengthened the rent regulation laws that impact people who live in rent stabilized and rent control apartments, but also implemented or strengthened some of the rights for people who are market rate based unregulated tenants. Um, for example, one of the changes that happened in 2019 was shortening the time for MCIs, major capital improvement. In the past, if your landlord had a major capital improvement in the building, for example, they got a new boiler, they were able to charge the tenant for the rest of their tenancy for that boiler per room. After 2019, that was limited to 30 years. Still a long time. We wanted to eliminate it completely, but that's what happened. Another thing that happened in 2019 is that we got rid of the vacancy decontrol, right? If you move into a new apartment, there were loopholes in the law that allow the landlord to destabilize the apartment, but that's not possible no more. And landlords can no longer charge 20% or 18% to the new tenant that comes into to a rent stabilized apartment. So there's a lot of loopholes that were closed that makes it hard for predatory landlords to displace people and harass tenants and hike the rents. So it was a major victory, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of tenants don't know that they have those rights. So some of the work that we are doing as a coalition for the whole state is continuing to educate people about what rights they have or not, because that's the main um, point to preventing displacement in our communities.
Now, can you talk about the 4 leadership committees? And I understand that some of them consist of like rent stabilization, rent control, but can you talk about them a little bit more?
Yeah, so Tenants and Neighbors believe in, we believe that the best method to fighting gentrification and displacement is by building a movement of grassroots tenant leaders who are educated and empowered. So after we organize at the building level, where we form tenant association, we engage deeply. We continue to engage deeply in leadership development. So we work closely with our leaders, and we engage in committee work. So if tenant leaders live in a rent stabilized building, we work together um, to basically have an influence over the campaigns and the legislative reforms that we work on at the city and the state level. Same thing with the HUD Leadership Committee. Most of those are people who live in Project Based Section A, federally subsidized building, and we have to do advocacy at the federal level. So it's basically that, empowering tenants to take control over their lives and their communities beyond the work that they do at the building level, but also to be ambassadors of the tenant movement, right? As an executive director, I am just one voice, but we believe that people who are directly impacted have uh, the solutions to the problem. So tenants are the solution to the housing crisis and the eviction crisis that we are facing right now.
Well, we have about a minute left. Can you just quickly let me know, what are your hopes for the future in regard to so much of the work that you do to support many New Yorkers?
What is the future of the work we do to support New Yorkers?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, one of the things that we're looking forward to is reforming the Rent Guideline Board. Our members are very excited to work on that. Right now, the board is completely chosen by the mayor of the city of New York, and our tenant leaders believe that the board should be more democratic. The city council should have a say on that. And there should be more tenant representatives sitting on the table. Right now, there's only 2 tenant representatives, 5 public members who also happen to be on the side of landlords. And it has been like that for a long time. Even though the Rent Guideline Board was formed to create fair adjustment to the rents, it has not worked that way, right? For the past, I don't know, 40 years, it has increased the rent, with the exception of the de Blasio administration that froze, the rent a few times. But it has not been that way throughout its history. So that's something that we are excited about. In the last year, we were fighting hard for good cost eviction. Good cost eviction is a bill to ensure that people who live in unregulated apartment also have uh, the right to remain in their homes and fight rent hikes. Right now, if you live in let's say a 2-3 family home, um, or a small building with less than 4 apartments, who is not a building that is not regulated, the landlord can decide to evict you whenever they want. That's something that we believe is not fair, and we work really hard for the governor to sign this bill. So we look forward working on that in the future. There's a lot of other legislation, like the Housing Assets Voucher Program. It's a program that kind of mirrors the Section
I'm
8
so
program.
sorry. We're running out of time, but I truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this. And hopefully, maybe we can come back again and talk further about this. But thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection. Want to get out of here? To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out.
Let's go!
And help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. Or how did I get here?
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Welcome back. Tender Steps of New York, Inc. is a nonprofit dedicated to helping families in challenging circumstances. They offer courses, workshops, advocacy, and case management with a strong focus on rebuilding family values and providing at-risk children with a nurturing home. Here to tell us more about Tender Steps of New York, Inc.'s president and founder Evelyn Bautista-Miller and board member Dr. Audrey Baker. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, could you introduce us a little bit more and tell us about Tender Steps of New York and its overall mission?
Thank you for having us once again. I feel like home. I graduated from Wharton High School, here, behind here, from the Bronx, and pretty much I had relocated to Rockland County, and in the work that we have done, I saw a need. And the need was very dear to my heart as a first-generation Dominican, parents with language barriers and just acquiring resources. And we created this nonprofit, and we're going to be celebrating 10 years of
congrats.
of supporting families and children, as well as school officials.
Well, I want to expand on that a little bit more. You talked about like your upbringing and kind of being in this area. Can you talk a little bit more about like why that's so important that like people from the community are, using their platform to help others within the community?
Absolutely. I feel that we are put here for a purpose, and I came from the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA projects, pretty much being raised during the crack times when you're going down the stairs in the project and you see the crack valves and all that. But despite that different adversity, we had a wonderful nuclear family. Both my parents were just incredible in utilizing resources and inspiring us and empowering us, as well as utilizing our gifts to be a blessing to others.
Now, I also want to mention the fact that, I said that it's really focuses on rebuilding family and providing like just opportunity for children in the area. How do you and your team approach this mission? As I can imagine that it is probably quite challenging to even help like kids within your own family. So, how do you approach that when you're helping a bunch of children and young adults within the community?
I'm going to ask Dr. Baker to answer. She's been one of the long-standing board members for Tender Steps. So, Dr. Baker, maybe
Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to have worked with Evelyn for almost 10 years. I'm one of the oldest members in the organization, and I call myself the grandmother. And I
said long-standing. I didn't talk about the age part.
And, we are impassioned about what we do here. We have had wonderful backgrounds. We've had wonderful parents who brought us to the point of understanding and having a goal value system to uplift the community and uplift humanity. And I'm an educator. You don't ever retire as an educator. You remain an educator.
Retired New York City principal.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you. And so we are accustomed to dealing with families. We are compassionate. We are involved with providing families with hope and with the success and providing efforts to make them successful in their lives. So no matter if they are dealing with crisis at this particular point, they are maybe out of their home or they're going through an economic crisis, we have been, and Evelyn has been so forthright and so diligent in trying to provide the kinds of resources and hope that we have had ourselves to extend it to the members of our community, whether you're in New York City, because I'm from Brooklyn, or from Rockland County.
Now, what are some of the key services you offer to achieve these goals?
Especially with what we're dealing now with undocumented children, families, language barrier has been one of the main support systems we've been doing in terms of offering interpreting services, offering support for families who are not able to learn how to navigate the system due to the language barriers. So in what we also have done is, as I mentioned, parenting workshops within shelters. We've done parenting workshop within school systems, just helping families, especially with the name of Tender Steps in New York. I came up with that because I know that as a person of color, it's really hard to ask for help. And using the word tender, I thought that was more welcoming and not to have families that are shameful of getting help. Yeah. And in terms of the other programs that we do a lot of collaboration because there's so many organizations that are doing great work. A lot of times the lack of collaboration really makes it less that you're making an impact. So Tender Steps have been very instrumental in building that bridge, especially with the 2 chapters in the NAACP in Rockland County, as well as legislators. We've done interpreting for them when they're trying to communicate with the community for different capacities. We've also done renovation at a shelter. I mean, it's something that we didn't do it alone. We collaborated with another nonprofit. And that's something that's important to share because we can't do it alone.
I also, you mentioned something that I thought was so important, and you said that like sometimes families may feel shame. I also want to add that to see that, the people who are behind the organization look like the families, I can imagine is also so important because especially when we're dealing with families, sometimes there's a lot of distrust. When someone says they're going to help you, maybe people are afraid, does this mean they're going to take my children away? Does this mean that they don't think I'm a fit parent? You know, how do you deal with that, or how do you use, you know, the power that you have in the community to let the people know, like, you know, I came from where you came from, and like I understand what you're going through, and not that it's like a stranger saying that they're going to help your family?
I think knowing another language, especially Spanish, has been very instrumental as an Afro-Latina that I am. That also takes some family back because they see the way I look, and then when to hear me speak another language, it is empowering to them to know that, oh, I'm not alone, or I don't need to grab my niece to be my interpreter, because that was me. I used to go to welfare appointments, my mom, to do the interpreting for her. My siblings, we used to take turns to do that, and I remember how they treated my mother. And I know that language barrier, sometimes people mistake not knowing the English language as not being intelligent.
Right.
And that's really unfortunate because a lot of these adults leave their country being a doctor, a surgeon, attorney, and guess what? When they come to the United States, you have to start from square one, right? And the most important thing is learning the language. So that's something that we really support in helping them understand that despite that, we're here for you and we're gonna actually help you. We did a series of Spanish-only workshops in Washington Heights, and what was interesting about it is that the parents did not know English at all, so this was Spanish only. And what touched me was when I was doing the workshop with them, as well as the board member who supported me there, I asked them one question, and it was one of the most emotional questions. I said to them, what was the dream that you gave up to come here and to be there for your family? And no one ever asked them that. Like, it was very emotional, and it was a great process towards the ending of it.
And I think you can definitely add to that, yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing in our organization is to do the mentoring. It's a very, very important piece, and it's significant to us because we're not just doing it to the parents. We're also doing it with the students, and we're doing it collaboratively. We're not doing it in a cellular form. So that we go to the colleges and do presentations, youth as well as parent presentations. We also go into the schools, and having been educators, we know how to facilitate and navigate that road so that we can provide community service credits for the students. So we have had projects where we recruited students to come out, and then they get credits on the high school program for having been assisting us in our little projects.
Well, I wanted to expand on that. You both have such an extensive background working with families and children, and then also being an educator. You know, what have you used from your past experience to help with the work that you're doing now?
Well, I'm a mother. I'm here with my amazing husband, who's definitely a great partner. We have 4 kids together. So we were like, okay, we're not going to have a 5th. I was like, so I want to have another baby. So this was it. And what's interesting about it is I have 4 amazing children, and each of them are different, right? So there's different challenges, different, and knowing what I go through, and I'm a professional. I went to the most prestigious, college for social welfare, SUNY Albany. I got that administrative, all of these things. But guess what? When you become a parent, all that goes out the window because we lose our cool and we have to try to compose ourselves. So if I'm struggling with that and I'm like debating, I cannot imagine someone who let's say doesn't have those types of experiences. So I want to use my gifts, and my mom raised 5 of us, so I learned a little bit from her as well. And especially with the fact that I know that I was only 22 when I lost my dad. He unfortunately passed away on the flight 587, which was the flight that crashed like 2 months after September 11th. This was the flight going to the Dominican Republic. Now, I was 22 when that happened, and I'm so grateful that I had a great foundation with both my parents, that it wasn't the end for me in the sense of being motivated, because my mother was an incredible woman. But that prompted me to say, you know what? I'm here for a reason. That was horrible what occurred, but yet I know I have more to give. And that's what brings me to this space.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious to know, what have you used from your background as an educator to help you with the work that you're doing for the community now?
Well, I started off as a teacher in a special education environment, and then I sailed through the process and became an assistant principal and working in different hospital sites and different agencies. I opened up different schools. I was one of the few to have an agency school actually come out to a regular school building. Then I became the director of pupil personnel in the Bronx for 24,000 children, became the principal. I have run for a position for the New York State Board of Regents. And I have a mother, my twin sister and I had a mother who lived to be 106 years old. So while everyone was doing Black Lives Matter, we were also doing Nursing Home Lives Matter. We are advocates and activists for younger children as well as older people. And so we are pursuing all of the gifts that we have had. We don't have lack of anything. We have been so totally blessed to have had a mother to live to 106 years old and to provide the kind of educational and professional and personal support that we've had. And so this is what we do. You know, we're here on earth to serve and not to be served.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's pretty amazing, 106. I'm like,
Yes.
you know, in awe by hearing that. So that's amazing. Now, I want to know, what was the driving force behind creating the nonprofit? And I can imagine it's like a lot of people have ideas and they want to do amazing things for the community, but it takes a lot of work. So can you just talk about that experience and, you know, what kind of kept you pushing to kind of see where it's at right now?
Yes, when I moved to Rockland County, this was in 2003, I started noticing that a lot of parents were not aware of their rights. Whether it's within the community, whether it's school, whether it's library, things like that. What? Voting. So I said, I need to educate them because they don't know, and they don't know that they have more rights than certain circumstances. So that made me say to myself, I want to do this under an umbrella, under an organization. I want to be helpful and purposeful and intentional as well. I know that during COVID, that put us all in a challenging position because you had to reinvent yourself. So when COVID happened, I felt like I needed another wind of something to help me keep going. And I feel so blessed to have been one of the 5 that was honored as Woman of Distinction for 2020. And with that, I said, okay, so I could keep going. And of course, board members and I, we did webinars on where are we now. We created something called Redefining COVID, which is looking at the optimistic side of a terrible situation that we didn't know that was really
E's,
coming.
the 5
With the
E's.
5 E's, the parent thing. Pretty cool stuff. Just to share a little bit, unfortunately, we lost our mom to COVID. And despite that adversity, again, that propelled me even more like, I could still do this. And especially with board members, incredible board members for Tender Steps, that has helped us continue to be focused despite things that happen within people's lives.
Yes.
And the people that we're servicing have probably gone through worse things.
Yes.
So we can do this.
Yes.
Now, I understand that you have like workshops and like just seeing you like excited, you know, I want to know like what can people expect, you know, when they attend these workshops and some of the other services that you provide?
Well, we don't do just academic and educational because we educate and inspire and involve all of our audiences, whether they're young or older, to be able to have hope and to take a look at where they are now so that they can catapult themselves to another platform of success. And so we have a Santa breakfast, so not everything is academic and educational.
We do fun things.
We do fun things, and we also make sure that we are including parents as well as young people. And sometimes we see young people struggling by themselves. They have lost their parents, you know, and so they're trying to navigate the system on their own. And so Tender Steps has been a tender step to provide that kind of assistance to people who are going through crises and are unable to resolve them and that if we're there, we can help them to navigate through the process.
And we've also helped individuals that are not parents themselves. Like a lot of the students that are coming undocumented, they're moving in with their godfather, their godmother, their aunt, uncle, or they were being raised by their grandparent, and they're meeting their parents for the first time. We've encountered a lot of that. So what we do is provide the access to assisting them.
That's amazing. And I think it's so important to talk about because in a lot of communities of color, we don't have like the nuclear family all the time. You know, sometimes you are living with your cousin or you live with your grandma or your aunt is raising you. So I think that's so amazing that we have like organizations that recognize that and, you know, kind of view it as like it's something normal, like, you know, that's just a normal part of family. I also want to we have like a few minutes left. I want to take a little bit to talk about this book. Can you tell us about the book? And you talked about it earlier and how it meant a lot to you. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Can I just interject one thing? That when we have our visionary luncheons, it is not just for older people. We invite younger people and we honor younger people also for the successes that they have had in their schools. So that is something that we do. It's not just honoring, you know, legislators or just people who have done wonderful things in the community. We're taking out an opportunity to look at students who are struggling but doing well and to provide them with the kind of encouragement and motivation.
Thank you so much.
These books are a few clips of things we've done over the past 10 years. It shows when we were painting and renovating the shelter. It shows the cleanups that we've done within the community. It shows a lot of collaborations and workshops that we've done. So just to answer what you said, it's just a bit of a few things that
like some of the highlights.
Some of the highlights.
Okay, and then I wanted to know, like, do you have any specific success stories that you know that you hold close to your heart that you think of, you know, while doing this work?
I'm thinking back 10 years ago when we started, there was a family, a gentleman, he got his son from whatever country it was and needed help. So he found me on Google and called the number, and what he needed help was something so simple as, where can I register my child? I haven't lived with this kid, with my son for years, but I want to get to know him. How can I do that? So it was just providing like the tools and, okay, so this is the resources, there's a community, and Tender Steps gets that a lot. Even we get questions for special education services and things like that. We've done workshop at Rockland Community College for special education 101. Because again, it's that they are not aware of, and it's just informing them of those. So thinking about that family that by himself raising his child, he was just so grateful that he was able to find somebody that had some information for him, and he didn't speak English. So that was one of the challenges that he had in getting support.
Well, I think the work that you guys are doing is just purely amazing, and I'm so glad that I had an opportunity to talk to you about this. Could you quickly just let everybody know where they can go to learn more information?
They can find it on our website, www.tenderstepsofny.org.
All right, well, I want to thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the Recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Kibin. Take care.